look at Job, because like he knows what's in our head and stuff, he could see if Job really does care about God.
Okay.
And Job's kind of already proven himself to him, like he prays and does like bunch of stuff to like please him. So what is God?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Same thing with like in Genesis 3, you know, when they've partaken of this fruit, and it says that the Lord went out and said, you know, where are you? Why? Okay. Well, here's the interesting thing about that. The Bible, that looks just like a book, doesn't it? Everybody agree with me? Looks just like a book. Unfortunately, this is anything but a book. You may have noticed that it's not like Harry Potter. You open up chapter 1 and just read straight through, right? It's not like that. The Bible actually is more accurately put, it's a collection of different documents written by different people at different times. And because it's written by different people, if we all wrote what we thought God was in this room, would any of them match? They might have some similarities, but they wouldn't match, right? Because God's something, you know, a little bit personal to everyone. Well, because you have different authors in the Bible, people are going to have different ideas.
I'm so sorry.
Man.
I know. I'm reading an online Bible, and since I didn't bring my paper one as I asked you all to, and it's making this...
I had a professor who, if your cell phone went off...
right in the middle of my... I'm so sorry.
I had a professor who's, if your cell phone went off, you had to get up and dance to it. We won't do that.
Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry, I made you lose your track. We were talking about different authors and how that might influence how God appears.
So I bring that up because when we read Job, we have to try really hard, and we have to realize that a particular author wrote Job. That same author didn't write Kings or Genesis or whatever. So the question you got to ask yourself is, where in Job does it say God knows everything, He's all-knowing? And the answer is it doesn't, you know, it kind of hint, you know, there's some hints of that towards the end, and it's like in God's speech out of the whirlwind. Certainly all-powerful. I think that could say that. But you do have to kind of realize that if you heard one thing from somewhere else, you can't necessarily assume it's going to be true in this setting. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
So is this during the time that Satan is still a servant of God?
Yes. In fact, I was going to mention, so you mentioned a fallen angel. That's where that whole story comes from. Because beforehand, so, you know, up here in like, let's see, it's around 65, 70 or so, when the book of Revelation is written, okay, up here, it presents Satan as more of what you've all described. But notice he's described as having fallen. Well, where is he fallen from? From heaven. So if you go back in time and look at what's happened before that, if he's fallen to get here, where is he going to be when you go back? He's still going to be playing his role up in heaven, right? So actually that idea of a fallen fallen angel, it only makes sense if you know, right, that he was originally part of this heavenly council. Yeah.
Wait, so is he still an angel? Or is he Satan, but like he hasn't?
All right, so that's all right. Oh, you know how many times I've said that? A lot. So at first, okay, in the Old Testament, any kind of reference you have of Satan is really Satan in the sense that he's one of God's helpers. He's part of this kind of collection of kind of God's kind of like servants of God, you could say, that makes up his council. They help God out. Now, that's how it's presented all the way up until there's one reference in Chronicles, and that's the latest written book in the Old Testament. And there's one reference in Chronicles that might be a reference more to the other kind of Satan, because the definite article is left off. But other than that, if you're reading about Satan in the Old Testament, it's going to be the accuser. In fact, if I got to translate a Bible, I would actually put in there the accuser. At the very least, I'd put the Satan, and I help kind of differentiate.
So it's not a name in the book of Job. It's a title. That's
right.
what he's trying to say. So Later on, it becomes associated with the name that you all are familiar with in this idea of a fallen angel.
Right.
But it's not necessarily an angel, it's just part of the heavenly council, which we talked about was the sons of God, right? Not necessarily what we've got some baggage around that angel too, that doesn't necessarily line up with what the author of Job was getting at.
So you might think of it like this. You've got God.
Yeah.
Okay.
You've got God, but that's not like, it's not like a name like Dustin, right? It's God. But God does have a name. What is it? Yahweh. Exactly. Okay. So there's this figure. Underneath him, you have all these other figures that make up this council of for God. And it's referred to as the sons of God. There's some other references in different parts of the Bible. But underneath one of those, right? You might let's just to kind of so you understand this. You might think of like this guy is like supervisor number 1. Okay. But of course, supervisor again, that's not somebody's name, right? That's just their title. So this guy's name's Steve. In fact, good ancient Hebrew name, right? But another one of those is this guy, the Satan, or the Satan. Okay. We don't have a personal name for him. It doesn't mention it anymore. But by the time you get up to the New Testament, ideas have changed just a bit, so that by the time you get there, it does shift. Where, for one, the Satan's not part of God's kind of realm anymore. He's fallen, as you pointed out. And he's also doesn't go, this isn't a title anymore. Now it is a name. Does that help?
Bryson, what was your question, Bryson?
Oh, well, mine isn't about Satan, if yours is. But I was just saying, why were Satan and God just spontaneously checking up on Job?
That's just kind of the view of God that the author of Job has. That, kind of how God works is God watches over the world. And, of course, God has an interest in people doing what's right. And so, you've got to make sure people are doing what's right. And so that's where this kind of job of the accuser, the Satan, enters.
So he'd done that before?
So what?
He'd done that before?
Yeah,
Okay.
you see references this in other places of the Bible as well. Yeah.
So back to the Satan thing. After he goes to hell, he's kind of like his own boss, like that. He's not really like.
After that, we don't know tons because there's so much tradition added on after the New Testament stuff. We get some descriptions really, but not tons because most of it, in fact, is very metaphorical. So we're not even sure what that quite means.
And can I just say, you all read some of Dante's Inferno?
Ah, yes, perfect.
A lot of those ideas that you're working through about hell and Satan as the king of it actually come from Dante's Inferno, not from the Bible. The Bible gives us, Dante obviously read the Bible, and he's expanding on what he found there in that piece of literature. But that literature was so popular and so influential and filled in so many holes for people in their imagination that it's become a really important influence in some of those ideas that you are thinking through, okay? Is that what you all heard in English class too? Does that disagree with what you've heard from? Okay, so,
cool, you read Dante, that's easy then.
some of it, right? You've touched on. So some of these ideas that you're working through actually come from that literature. And yes, he read the Bible and was influenced by the Bible, and the Bible has, but it's not all spelled out in the Bible the way it is in the Inferno, and so it became a very important piece of literature because it answered so many questions that people had.
Because if you ever noticed that not everything you might want to know is in the text of the Bible? Like it doesn't say what a good amount of time to text messages in the Bible. I don't know why, it should be in there, right? It doesn't say how many hours of television you should let your child watch. I wish it did.
Right.
You're right, that's the point, right? There's a bunch of things missing that as modern people we would love for them to be in there, but they're not. And so what often happens, we just kind of fill in that gap. Or we take something that maybe sounds sort of like that and kind of make it that.